Hello and welcome to the London 2012 Plan for Success webinar series from Cisco, which aims to help UK businesses prepare for the Games. For this webinar, Cisco has teamed up with London 2012 partners Atos, G4S and Deloitte to examine the security challenges that businesses could face in the lead up to and during the Games. We will cover key topics that are likely to affect businesses of all sizes in the UK, including cyber, physical and personal threats, and will provide guidance on how to minimise the risks. With us today, I'm pleased to welcome Mark Jones, Global Director of Identity, Security and Risk Management from Atos.
Hi.
Richard Strudwick, Senior Consultant, Major Events for G4S.
Good afternoon.
Sean Sutton, Director of UK Security and Privacy Team from Deloitte.
Hello.
Atos, as the worldwide IT partner for the Olympic and Paralympic Games and top sponsor, Atos integrates, manages and secures the vast IT system that relays results, events and athlete information to spectators and media around the world. Atos is responsible for leading the consortium of IT partners to design, build and operate the massive mission-critical IT infrastructure and solutions that will support the London 2012 Games. G4S Secure Solutions Limited is the official security services provider and Tier 3 sponsor of the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. G4S UK is responsible for recruiting, training and managing the security workforce, which will work alongside the military, police and local authorities to secure all London 2012 competition and non-competition venues. Deloitte is the official professional services provider for London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Deloitte are not involved in any IT operational security elements for the Games, however, have provided over 400,000 hours of expertise to the organising committee to date, from organisation, design and temporary venues to customer experience, consulting and tax advice. Deloitte is playing an integral role in the delivery of the Games. During 2008 Beijing Olympics, China was subjected to around 12 million online attacks per day. In light of the threat from virtual attacks, you should take measures to ensure your business network infrastructure remains secure. There are also potential physical and personal threats to consider. The British government increased its spending on security at the Games to £553 million to counteract the physical threats it expects. This shows just how serious the threats are and indicates that if your business is yet to put contingency plans into place, now is the time to start. With an additional 294,000 people anticipated to arrive in the UK, and with the whole world watching, it's of the utmost importance to ensure your business and staff are in a safe environment. When putting business contingency plans in place, it's important to consider 3 points. First, the impact of accidental or deliberate disruption on businesses, including their cyber, personal and physical security. Secondly, which industry sectors are potentially most at risk from virtual attacks? And thirdly, which areas are potentially most susceptible to physical attacks? By understanding these factors, a business will be in a much stronger position to deal with any potential security threats. So at this point, I'd like to turn to Mark to ask you a question, if I may. So, as the official IT sponsor for the Games, do you think that the main cyber security challenges businesses face in the run-up to Games, what do you think they are?
So I think that every business in the period running up to the Games and during the Games will face additional challenges around hacking. That may be an obvious point, but I think the UK IT infrastructure in general is going to be more exposed to threats and hacking, particularly on an international basis during the Games. And I think also people need to think about the availability of their systems, because their systems are likely to be more heavily loaded during the Games,
Sure.
for obvious reasons.
Okay, thank you. I'd now like to turn to Sean and just bring you in, if I may. As the professional services provider for the Games, what do you recommend to your clients?
Well, I think it's really important that our clients understand what their threat profile is. It's really important to understand that threat profile, because once you understand it, you can start putting the plans in place to respond to mitigate, and to really try and meet some of the challenges posed by cyber activists, hackers, and all sorts of other groups that over the last few months and years have really hit the media and the press.
Thank you. So Mark, if I come back to you again. I mean, what are the risks associated with poor business IT security?
Well, I think the obvious one, to be quite honest, Ian, is that breaches of confidentiality. If you're working in a business which is developing significant IPR, you differentiate through that IPR, you're obviously interested in protecting the privacy of that IPR. I think businesses should also really be concerned about their ability to offer IT services which are always available, so capacity, resilience are very important. And I think that very often the cybersecurity debate, one can get very focused on hacking and compromised privacy, which is obviously important. But to be quite honest, UK businesses are just going to experience additional load, additional demand as a result of London 2012 in a lot of cases. And I think they need to think as well about making sure that their IT systems are available enough. Also, reputational damage is obviously a big issue in terms of obviously a successful attack, and loss of revenue. You know, if your IT systems are successfully compromised, that may take them offline. As soon as they're taken offline, of course, that affects the business that you're operating itself. So it damages your reputation through your customer relationships, but also actually potentially cuts off your lines of revenue.
Okay, that's a very good point. Very good point. Sean, what are the risks associated with poor business IT security from your perspective?
So I think failing to get the basics right is one of the major outcomes of poor business IT security. And those basics are things like making sure systems are patched, making sure that the latest vulnerabilities are known about, and at least then you're on the front foot to try and prevent those becoming the avenues through which a cyber attacker may target your organisation. Poor business IT security can absolutely lead on to I think some of the points that Mark was making around information leakage, whether that's very targeted. So hackers looking to get and steal perhaps sensitive information, private information, but also poor IT security can lead to accidental loss of information. And again, lots of examples of that happening in the press over the last few months and years. Reputational impact as well, often very hard to quantify, unfortunately, until you've had a breach, and then you can look back and retrospectively understand how bad that incident might have been for your particular organisation. And then, of course, there's the direct financial losses, whether that's regulatory fines or whether that's just the cost of clean-up.
Okay, thank you. So, Mark, another question for you, if I can. In your experience, how frequently do you see a lack of alignment between business priorities and IT infrastructure security spending? I mean, do you have any recommendations about how these can be tightened and close that gap?
So I think, firstly, your first question, I do see regular instances. I would say over 50% of the organisations that I deal with do not really have a tight alignment between the threats to their business and how they spend money to mitigate those threats. And I think many organisations can do more about that. I think the key in addressing that issue of misalignment, or to a certain extent spending money in the wrong places, if you like, is to actually look at what's driving value in your business, where that value sits in your business processes, so your customer management processes, your research processes, your innovation processes, and how the key the IT infrastructure is supporting those processes. As soon as you get that far, you've got a clear focus on where the value in your business is, and you can start making effectively technical decisions about how to spend money on protecting those key components of IT to protect that value. So summarising that, it's all about thinking about business value and trying to divorce yourself from simply thinking about the IT infrastructure. Where's the value generated in the business? How do I align my IT to protect that value?
Okay, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sean, which industries should be most concerned about network security?
Well, I think all industries need to be concerned about network security. There's probably a few obvious ones that I'd perhaps put on top of that list. So critical national infrastructure, the organisations that are responsible for making sure the lights go on, that the trains and the tubes are still working, that we have energy in our homes. Now, clearly, as a target, they are big targets. So they're perhaps one industry area where they really need to have a focus on network security. I think also, slightly more broadly than that, there's the communication providers, the people that provide our telecommunication systems, whether that's mobile, whether that's some of the TV or perhaps some of the IP on-demand services. Now, clearly, if there's a problem with security in and around their networks, that could quite dramatically lead to a loss of the services that they're providing. Financial services, clearly they're always a prime target, and also I think retail as well is another area where, again, network security very important, because if something happens in their network environment that means that they lose their e-commerce sites, then clearly that can have a direct financial implication for the particular business.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is everyone.
Afraid so, yes.
Okay, thank you. So Mark, another question for you, if I may. What measures should businesses take to minimise cyber threats during the Games?
So I think, to a certain extent, in terms of our programme today, this is really at the heart of advising businesses. I would say start with the basics, to be quite honest. There's no need to construct some intellectually massive approach to IT security. Make sure you're doing things like patching. Are you patching regularly? Are you verifying that you're patching? Make sure that you're conducting some sort of pen testing or vulnerability review, as security people call it. Make sure that you're looking at where are those gaps in my protections from a technical point of view. I think that running a good business-centric assessment is very important as well. So again, as I talked about earlier on, really you're all about protecting the value in your business. You're not about buying particularly expensive pieces of IT. So start by thinking about where the value is in your business, deconstruct that value, then look at the risks and understand those risks. I think, as Sean was alluding to earlier on, understand the risks that are facing off against that value and prioritise them. Actually create a prioritised list, debate them, create a group within your business that actually looks at this quite hard. You may use some external advice as well, and look at those prioritised lists of threats. And then after you've done all that, from business value into where are the threats, then think about investment and really tightly align that investment with the degree of threat you're facing and the amount of business value you want to protect. And also, when you're doing that, think about the degree of risk you want to accept. It's pretty impossible to remove all risk. Try and make qualified judgments about the degree of risk that you're willing to accept at the end of the process.
Okay, and I think the important point here as well is this, while we're talking about this is the lead up to the Games, this is something that businesses should be doing throughout anyway.
Absolutely.
This isn't just for the Games.
Absolutely. I think the Games is a wonderful wake-up call in a way, because of course there are geopolitical aspects in terms of cyber security, and I think there is additional focus. So why not use this if you're leading a team? Why not use it as an opportunity to go back to your management team and say, look, I could do with a little bit more of investment here. I think we're in a high threat time with the Games.
Yep.
Let's do a review. Let's look at where we can sharpen up. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. So Sean, what measures should businesses take to minimise cyber threats during the Games from your perspective, from a Deloitte point of view?
Well, I think I would certainly echo some of the points that have just been made. Very important to understand what your cyber threat profile is. That's different for each organisation. What I think is really important in an area that we work a lot with our clients is not just to look at things in isolation, so don't just narrow down and focus on your business. Make sure you understand the broader spectrum within which you work, so your sector, but actually look around, look outside of your sector. Really important to understand your cyber threats, where you sit within the bigger picture, and then you can start formulating a view and a strategy on how best to put yourself in a position to better mitigate some of the challenges and some of those cyber threats. Again, another point that's been made a couple of times, doing the basics. I mean, unfortunately, we can't get away from needing to patch our systems, making sure antivirus is up to date. They are the basics, and lots of organisations have processes in and around their organisation to make sure that these things happen, but really making sure they're happening and happening well and happening in a timely fashion, very, very important. penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, very effective at taking a point-in-time view to see what windows and doors are open. Now, clearly, when you know what potential attack vectors a cyber attacker may look to take, you can start to again close down some of those potential avenues of attack. I think also going back to the point I made about understanding what your cyber threat is. Some of those cyber threats might be born out of people looking to steal your IP and get to perhaps your sensitive research and development material. So really taking a good look at that information within your business to make sure that it's appropriately protected. Is it encrypted? Is it separated from the environment? Do we have appropriate data loss prevention technologies in place? But of course, a big key component of security is making sure that all these systems are monitored. There's all sorts of technologies you can use to automate that, but it's really important to be proactive in monitoring and trying to be on the front foot in identifying an issue before it perhaps becomes a much bigger problem within the organisation.
Okay. And I guess with no organisation being able to operate in independently of any others, organisations should be asking their suppliers as well what they're doing from a security point of view.
And again, that's an area that we've spent a lot of time working with a large number of our clients, really looking at that supply chain. And that again is, that there are lots of, for different organisations, lots of threats that could exist within that supply chain. Not just sort of the manufacturing componentry, where's the component coming from and is that actually introducing a threat into my environment, but who am I connected to? Do I know who my service providers are? Because quite often when you start following through the daisy chain of third party to third party to third party, you suddenly find that at some point you've lost all control and actually you're dealing with 6 companies. Yep. That's a really key point, a really good point.
Okay, thank you. So if I could stay with you, Sean, as a professional services provider for the Games, what would you recommend your clients do to secure their networks?
So again, I probably sound like a broken record, but it's down to doing the basics. I mean, the Games isn't particularly far away, so really look at the basics. Are systems up to date? Are they being patched? I think the other thing that I would certainly bring in is keep an eye on, monitor external threat information. There's lots of really good sources out there that provide you with a view of the latest threats as they emerge. So places like CP&I, for example, for critical national infrastructure. Really important to keep that broader view on what's happening, what the threat profile is, as well as keeping a view on your business as well. And clearly, when you combine the two, you're in a better place to make proactive decisions.
Excellent. And that obviously that assessing that ongoing threat is something that needs to be done on a regular basis.
Absolutely, and should be part of doing the basics well, continually reassessing, because unfortunately it's not a do it once and you're safe exercise, it's a continual process.
Thank you. Mark, if I can come back to you. As the official cybersecurity provider for the Games time, how do you approach an event like the Olympics? Now, obviously, you're not just involved in London 2012. You're also involved in. You've been involved in other games before, and you're also involved going forward.
Absolutely. So we started looking at this in 2002 for the Salt Lake City Games, and we're actually contracted via the International Olympic Committee to be responsible for cybersecurity for them for the central systems up until 2016. So I think that what's really central, and I really echo the point about broken record here, is you've got to understand your threat environment. The key point here is actually the threat environment is evolving very, very quickly. So if you look, for instance, 4 years ago, the sheer volume of threats was tiny compared to what it is now. We've seen this explosion in the volume of threats. We've actually seen also an explosion in the complexity of threats. And therefore, really, if you want to deal with some of these issues, one of the key things you need to do is model the threats and be very conscious as a business of what threats you're dealing with. Don't say, well, an IT security vendor will deal with that for me. Actually look at the threats yourself and have some governance in your business that's concentrating on prioritization of threats and being aware of threats. CP&I, for instance, in the UK is fantastic, and a lot of the more mature administrations have an equivalent to CP&I around the world. But I think secondly, we're seeing a big change in digital security, really, and that change is that traditionally it's been a barrier-oriented approach. So you put some big barriers in place and hopefully the bad guys won't get through the barriers. Increasingly what we're starting to see now is threats of such a complexity that really monitoring, analysing behaviour and being able to respond quickly to something which is an issue either inside or outside, you can't really take it for granted that they're outside anymore, is becoming really vital. I would almost say that if you're a medium or large size business now and you're not conducting real-time security monitoring and trying to react to security incidents in real time. That's something that we do a lot of with the Olympics, really core in the Olympic approach, is to make sure that we monitor threats in real time and respond in real time. I think that you need to question whether you're spending in the right area if you're not doing some real-time monitoring and reacting. I think, as Sean said earlier on, be on the front foot with this stuff, absolutely. And you're probably going to need to get, if you're a medium-sized business, probably some help with that. And there are a lot of organisations that can help you with analytics and real-time monitoring with security.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to physical security aspect now. So Richard, welcome, bring you into the conversation. Planning ahead to ensure you have adequate security personnel in place and taking appropriate measures to draw mitigation and contingency plans, as well as encouraging and the retention of security staff is of utmost importance in preparing for the Games. I mean, what do you think are the main physical security challenges businesses will face in that run-up to the Games?
Okay, well, I think if we take a look back at recent history, I think protester activity is on the increase. I think probably unprecedented austerity measures across certainly Central Europe and this country. And it's not a huge leap to see that protester activity perhaps being transferred to the Olympics. The Olympics are a very easy target. That there are movements and organisations that really see the Olympic movement as a very profligate organisation, and I think any organisation associated with the Olympics should really be looking at a plan to mitigate potential protester activity against them during the Games. I think also if you look at the fact that the Metropolitan Police have openly stated that they are not going to prevent lawful protest during the Games, provided it is planned, provided it is safe, and provided it is peaceful. That will give any one of our very, very diverse population the opportunity to protest directly against any one of the 205 competing nations that are going to be in London. So I think, to labour the point, I think protester activity is going to be key. I think also acquisitive crime. Acquisitive crime does tend to reduce in the areas immediately surrounding Olympic venues, clearly because of the quite concentrated security presence and police presence. But that is not going to translate to the whole of the Greater London area, or indeed any of the other areas like Weymouth and Portland, Windsor for Eton Dorney, and some of the other venues around the country. So criminal fraternity may see the police focus being on the Olympics as an opportunity to increase their activities certainly in acquisitive crime.
Okay, thank you. And I guess, are businesses at risk if they do not take the threat to physical and personal security, seriously enough? I mean, what are your thoughts around that?
It's a perennial problem. It's not just Olympic focused, but clearly, again, the Olympics is going to bring a lot of focus to London and the surrounding areas. And as Mark and Sean have said, companies should be looking at the basics. If you have a fence and it has a hole in it, fix it. If you have barriers, make sure they work. When's the last time you changed the codes on your access control system? So some fairly basic things, but also training for your security officers. Both Sean and Mark have mentioned CPNI, but the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, NACTSO, they have a very, very good tool for particularly any business that might be affected by the Olympics. It's called a venue self-assessment tool. It takes about half an hour to complete. And the venue self-assessment tool will actually give you a snapshot of what your vulnerabilities are, but it also gives you access to the counter-terrorism security advisors in your local police force, and also some access to free training, such as Argus, which is specifically aimed at security officers, and specifically aimed at security officers being trained to spot some of the terrorist hostile reconnaissance techniques, for instance, which can be employed to great effect, particularly in built-up areas like London.
Yeah. And I guess exactly the same as the previous conversation, this isn't just something that you do as a one-off activity. This should be something that is an ongoing conversation, review, throughout the business.
Good security practice, it's not just about having an annual risk assessment. It should be the core of what you do as a business. It's about understanding your vulnerabilities, it's about undertaking a risk assessment, and it's about having a mitigation in place for the risk that you've actually identified.
Okay, thank you. So just stay with you, Richard. I mean, which industries do you think are most at risk from a physical security perspective?
I think if you look at games time, we've already talked about the sponsorship community. We also have to understand that 205 countries coming to the games. Each of those, or a lot of those, will have a national house. And so whilst a company may not feel it's under direct threat because of the games, because it's 5 miles away from Stratford, there may well be a country house nearby occupied by a country who has got a profile that might attract protesters. So again, using VSAT, engaging with your council to understand whether there are any buildings being, conference venues being used nearby for Olympic or Olympic related activity will enable you to put in place an Olympic plan. But also critical national infrastructure, as Sean mentioned. I mean, there were 2 mobile phone providers who had data centres hit last year, which took out masses of capability in the UK. Clearly, if that happened during the Games, it's extremely bad press, very, very bad publicity for them. And so again, just hardening the target, making sure that you have processes and procedures and people in place to make sure that your assets are protected. And in the absence of any intelligence, just make sure you're secure and make sure you're doing the basics, as I think has been laboured today. Yeah. But I think we're all very much of an accord. Start with the basics.
Yeah, it's coming through. Well. I'm beginning to hear that theme running through all of this now, which is good. And just staying with you, Richard, I mean, which measures should businesses take to minimise physical security threats at the Games themselves?
Okay, well, apply the risk management process. Do a risk assessment. Do risk assessment in relation to the Olympics, your proximity to it, your sector and circumstances. But look at what it is you're actually protecting. Certainly the people and assets of your business, but you might not be under direct threat. But again, due to proximity, protester activity, where you have to evacuate your premises because of a terrorist threat. How is your business going to be affected by that? And also look at your supply chains. It's not just about what you're doing, it's about what your supply chains are doing. So if your business relies on perishable goods, have your supply chain put in place sufficient mitigation to make sure that they can deliver consistently throughout the Games period.
Very good advice, thank you. So we've now got some questions we're going to go through that have come in actually. Let me have a quick look. Okay, Sean, if we could maybe start with you, if that's okay. Why would there be any specific increased risk to security other than physical security due to the increased density in people in London?
So I think the one thing to bear in mind is that whilst there'll be several 100,000 extra people in London, physically in London, there'll be many, many millions more that are tuning in via IPTV or over the internet, that are taking an interest in not just watching the Games, but actually looking at all the services that are provided around the Games. So I mean that there are lots of websites and there are lots of points of action, points of connectivity into all the services and things that are going on around the Olympics and the different venues. So I think it's important to remember that you don't have to be physically located in London to be able to launch a cyber attack. You can be halfway around the world. So the two really do go hand in hand.
Okay. Mark, question for you if I can, please. Come in here. AV vendors are now finding virus signatures that are 5 years old. What can small businesses without dedicated security teams find out if they have been compromised already? And follow on to that is, could there be any 2012 bot armies waiting to strike on a timed basis?
Well, I think we've all heard people like Vince Cerf talk about botnets and the increased use of botnets. I think London 2012 is a point in time where there will be additional cyber attack activity. There's no doubt about it. In terms of organisations who have limited budget, understanding whether they've been attacked or not, I think one of the best things that you can do is keep your virus management software up to date. If you can afford it, get some separate, from another company, from another vendor, scanning software. Don't use your primary antivirus vendor. Get some separate scanning software, and even if you've got a small IT department, try and do some scanning, and it's amazing what you can come up with even with a simple scan. Then, you know, if you find something, you talked about whether people would find something that they should do. If you've got a very small IT team, one of the things you can do there, for instance, is just to buy some books, to be quite honest, around the subject of what's called IT forensics. You can also pull in a third party, and there are third parties who will provide IT forensics or analysis of IT attacks as a service. But I think this really all starts with awareness. You know, get some scanning software, do some scans. Even the smallest companies can do that. And particularly if you're in a small manufacturing company, you're designing and building differentiated products. I think it's really important to protect your confidentiality in those situations, even if you are small.
Yep. And again, the thing I'm picking up on here is that if they're not doing this already, this should become the basics.
BAU, business as usual. It should be in there. And there are all sorts of concepts around that, which are great concepts. There's an international standard called ISO 27001, which advocates a very simple, process-centric embedding of some business as usual security. It's called the ISMS, an Information Security Management System. Have a look at that. You don't have to spend years on it. You might put somebody on it for half a day a week for a couple of weeks, and just build out some standard processes, as you say quite rightly, which your organisation always does around security. I think the biggest thing, the biggest problem you can have is literally not to focus on security at all, not to have some BAU activity in security.
Fantastic, thank you. And Richard, if I could ask you the final question, please. What do you feel are the key training points I need to cover with my staff for internal office security?
Okay, well, in the context of the Games, and if I'm permitted to be a bit London-centric, as it is a London Games, I think a look at the NACTSO website, which I believe is being shown as we've been speaking, will give you access to Project Argus training, and that's very, very valuable for security officers. It very much looks at spotting signs of hostile reconnaissance, which is the activity undertaken by terrorists when they're planning a target. But also, City of London Police piloted and started something called Project Griffin. And again, very similarly to Argus, it's about awareness. Project Griffin training is offered by City of London Police and also, I believe, the Met now. And that gives security officers a very good grounding in some of the basic techniques, and also understanding that bridge between private security and police and how they can be a help, not a hindrance. So there's some very, very practical advice for security officers about how and what they should be looking for and how to report it as well, so that they're not just deluging the emergency services with information.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So hopefully you've found the last 30 minutes useful. I'd like to thank a panel of experts that have joined us today and for their time. But before we finish completely, maybe we could just take 30 seconds each just to give me your final thoughts. And Mark, if we could start with you, please.
Well, I think it's been laboured, Ian, but basics really. I think your point's a very good one as well. Build some security into your business as usual. Have a focus, which means you're always doing something on security, and do the basics. Patch and try and be aware of the threats that are facing you, including doing scan-in. Those would be my points. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I would agree. So we've talked about the basics a lot. Understand the cyber threats in relation to your business and slightly more broadly. And if you need help, there are lots of organisations, open source sources, all sorts of information you can go to get that help. And I think that's really important. No, don't feel ashamed. Don't feel it's a bad thing to do to go and get help, because I think that's really useful.
Okay, thank you. And Richard?
Plan. You know, I think the threat to most businesses' profit and revenue streams are lack of an effective business continuity plan. Know what your risks are, and challenge your security provider to build those bridges with first responders. Arrange training with the police service, Argus and Griffin particularly.
Fantastic, thank you. So thank you to all the speakers for joining us today. For more information or advice on how to ensure your business runs safely during London 2012, have a look around the site. You can also plan for success with our Games Ready test. You can also run the Business Ready 2012. You can also join, the Business Ready 2012 LinkedIn group to continue this discussion and find out further information. Now, please do not hesitate to contact us if you have or want any further information or advice based on what you've heard today. And I really do hope that you've found this a very informative and useful session. So thank you and goodbye.